Hi guys and welcome to Linux Ort. Some weeks ago I made a video why you should switch to Linux, and I talked about 5 reasons which speak for Linux. But what about the other side? What about the arguments which are speaking against Linux? I would say let's start right through with this video. I want to debunk 5 Linux myths from which you probably heard of. Let's start with the first myth. Linux is too difficult anyway. Who wants to keep using a terminal or a console? If we have a look to our Linux Mint, for example, then we see a small terminal here which we can open, and if I type some weird keywords in there and type in my password, then we see a lot of text. And I was at a point some years before where I thought myself, so yeah, that's kind of magic. You type in one single line and there are coming many lines, and why are they coming and what do they say to me? And if you type in a little text to it, then you change something on your computer. That's very weird. But yeah, Linux is built on this terminal shell, which is called bash in the first place. And 20 years ago or 25 years ago, this was the thing for installing Linux, but also for using Linux sometimes. Nowadays, this is history. You can choose using the terminal. That is very handy. For example, in many tutorials, I also show the terminal. This is because on the terminal, this works for everyone or almost everyone under Linux. And if I just show it in the graphical user interface, which is very improved with Linux Mint, so you can do almost everything you can do in the terminal in the graphical user interface. So this was a thing maybe about 15 or 20 years ago, but nowadays you won't really need the terminal, only if you are installing some very special drivers. But for that, there isn't Linux the problem, but it's the hardware manufacturer which thinks about, yeah, these Linux guys, it's enough if we give them a script and then they are doing their thing. Sometimes there are still some hardware manufacturers like this out there, but almost all hardware, we will talk about this in a few minutes, just works fine with Linux right out of the box, and you don't really have to do anything about this. But in the daily life on your computer, you won't need any terminal anymore. It isn't too difficult. Linux Mint is very easy. It orientates itself to Windows 7 or Windows 10. And also many hotkeys you are familiar with under Windows, they are also working in Linux Mint. So it should be a smooth transition from the Windows world in this area. I would say let's come to the next myth, and this is a myth I heard also a lot about. If it's free, it's no good. So yeah, Linux is free of costs. Also, many software projects you are using, or all software projects you're using right through on your Linux machine, are completely free. And why is that so? This is because many users which are using Linux want to give something back because they are profiting very much from Linux, from the existing software, and they want to improve this and they want to share it with everyone else, so to say, to give something back. And also this is happening with many big companies. For example, if we have a look to kernel.org, here we have it, we see some very famous companies, for example Google, but also Microsoft is investing in the Linux kernel. If we have a look to the Linux Foundation and to their sponsors, here we see all members. There is Google, Microsoft, Meta, Huawei, Fujitsu, IBM, and so on, Samsung, all the bad companies, Tencent, of course. This is because all these companies are profiting from Linux. They are building their businesses on top of Linux, for example, in the server infrastructure. So these companies see, okay, we shouldn't do this alone. This is a good point to cooperate all together and to create a free software which is independent from any big company. And so, yeah, they are also profiting very much from Linux, but also want to give something back because they have a very big interest that the software projects, like we see it here, are secure and also are kind of healthy, so they are getting updates in the future and so on. So yeah, this point doesn't come to software about Linux in many cases. And how are earning some Linux companies like Canonical for Ubuntu or Red Hat or SUSE, how are they earning money? This is because they are offering support about Linux and their software for big companies. For example, Red Hat was sold to IBM in 2018 for about $36 billion. And many companies are profiting from this free software, and you can have a look to it like a collaborative project from which everyone is profiting. And if everyone gives a little bit of their effort or money, then this works right through. And this also works, for example, for Linux Mint. If we have a look to linuxmint.com, which is the operating system I'm using here right now, if we have a look to the donors here, we see in the September 2024, the Linux Mint project got about $11,000. And if we have a look to the December, they are getting about a quarter to $100,000, which is very much for, I guess, about 5 developers which are creating Linux Mint. You don't need too many developers to create big projects, because also Linux Mint is relying on the effort of the Linux kernel, which is supported by these companies, for example, and many other projects which the Linux Foundation, for example, is supporting. So yeah, if you have some bugs and you are very happy with Linux Mint, just consider by supporting it, just if you want. I'm not affiliated in any way with the Linux Mint project. So if you are happy about this, there is an option to donate to this Linux Mint project or to any other open source project. But if you don't want to, that's also completely okay. If you just tell your friend, hey, just have a look to Linux or to this cool open source program, then you are also helping a lot. So it doesn't have to be money. Everything's fine. So yeah, this is it. If it's free, it's no good. And also if we have a look to the internet browsers like Google Chrome, Firefox and so on, or the internet itself, for example, if we have a look to HTTPS, which is securing the connection between this Linux Mint server and us, or for example your banking account and us, this is all saved via HTTPS. This is completely free software and open source, and it's only secure because it is open source. If you want to dive deeper into this topic, just look up for security by obscurity. This explains this kind of tradition. So let us come to the next myth. This is Linux doesn't run properly on many computers and doesn't support my computer anyway. Yeah, this is very harsh and this is a bit over the top. But the main point is, how is it with drivers under Linux? And I can say to you, for 95% of all computers which are out there, they are working quite fine with Linux. Maybe there is some hardware which won't work. For example, the fingerprint reader. This isn't really a Linux thing. Also, the face detection for unlocking your screen instead of a password. This is also not a practice in Linux. It would work technically, and some companies have implemented it for their Linux machines, but this isn't really a thing under Linux. In this point, just use a password, or you can also use some small USB sticks which are containing a key, for example the YubiKey, and then you are also very secure and very fast for unlocking your computer. But that's a point for another video. I have worked with many hundreds of computers, or maybe now with about thousands of computers with Linux, and I can say to you that almost all computers are working right if they are older than 1 year, because if we have a look, for example, to Linux Mint, it isn't the Linux with the newest hardware support because it is kind of more stable. But this also changed with Linux Mint 22. So we are getting also newer kernel updates and newer drivers with every point release of Linux Mint. So every 6 months we get now new driver support for newer machines. So this problem also will vanish about the time. But I would say, as a rule of thumb, if your computer is older than 1 year, then everything's fine. And if you want to buy a new machine for Linux, then I can recommend HP, Lenovo, and Dell, for example, where you can install very easily Linux Mint. But also there are some computer manufacturers like Tuxedo Computers, System76, and so on, many more, which pre-install Linux on your computer, and they are using only hardware which definitely works under Linux. So just have a look into your search engine. It's depending where you live, but also most of the newer computers are working with Linux right away. Maybe some things, maybe the camera will only work if the system gets a bit older and the software gets a bit newer. But unless that, you won't have too many problems with drivers nowadays. And also if we have a look to printers, that isn't really a thing anymore. About 10 years before, this was a big problem, but now Linux has evolved much, and also many driver manufacturers are now supporting Linux officially. So this isn't any problem anymore. If we have a look, for example, to Amazon and I search, for example, a webcam, let us go, for example, with the Logitech webcam. There you can search for specific info, then just type in Linux, and then you see many reviews which are talking about, hey, is this working under Linux or is this not working under Linux? So here we see the newer answers. For example, here, the 6th of February 2023, we see working out of the box with Linux. Also here, graded quality and plug and play on Linux. This works. If you wonder about this one, yeah, Ubuntu 18.4 is outdated right now. So yeah, don't use Ubuntu 18.4 anymore because we are now at Ubuntu 24.4. So this is about 6 years ago. So yeah, just have a look and there you see, okay, is this working with Linux or is this not working with Linux? A quick search also gives you the information, hey, is this product working with Linux or not? And most of the hardware is working good with Linux. Let us come to the next one. No decent software runs on Linux, and don't get me even started on games. Haha. Yeah, so how is it with software under Linux? And yeah, if you Googled a bit about Linux, you see or you hear many complaints, which software is running on Linux? Does my software run on Linux? And at the first point, I could say in the terms of software, for 95% of you, Linux is completely suitable and is a really good operating system. And you get everything done also with the Linux and with the software on Linux for daily things you're doing. But there's only one exception. This is because not 100%, but 95%. This is with Adobe software. So if you're using, for example, Adobe Lightroom, Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Designer, I guess, all these Adobe products aren't working under Linux. I don't recommend this because, yeah, Adobe doesn't support Linux right through. And I guess this won't change in the next years. I don't have big hope about this. So if you are doing something with multimedia or media professionally, then I guess a Mac is the best thing for you because the media and multimedia industry is really focused on Apple products nowadays. Yeah, that's a lot of money, but yeah, this is how it is working in the professional multimedia industry. If you are creating multimedia for YouTube, Instagram, and so on, you won't have any big issues with Linux because there's also very cool software for this. For example, the software I can recommend, which I'm also cutting these videos here, is Kdenlive. It's a great video editor. It has everything you need, but also there is, for example, DaVinci Resolve from Blackmagic Design. This program also officially supports Linux, but I got many critics from users that they are not happy with DaVinci Resolve under Linux. So yeah, just be warned if you want to cut some videos. For example, KDE is a great software, or for example also Shortcut and many other more. Also, if you're looking for Adobe alternatives, there's for example GIMP for image manipulation. This is like Photoshop, I would say. Also we have Inkscape. This is like Adobe Designer. I hope it's the right product. This is for vector graphics, logos, and so on. And we have also Krita or Krita. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's for drawing, and they are really professional. And also if you are modeling something in 3D or want to animate something, just have a look on Blender. Also big movie companies are using Blender. So yeah, this is a really powerful tool, and all the software is completely free and open source. This is because many of you and also some companies are using these software and are contributing to it so that this software can live on. One of the best examples is Blender. It gets about multiple millions US dollars, I guess. The Blender Foundation lives really good because, yeah, in the multimedia industry, there is a lot of money. And so, yeah, also the open source software about it is very rich, I would say. Yeah, not rich, they are investing a lot of money to it, but this project is a very big success for open source and free software. And of course, also for us. Also, there's another point. How is it looking with Microsoft Word, Excel, or PowerPoint? These Microsoft Office apps are not supported for Linux, but there are many alternatives. For example, you could use Word Online, for example, but this isn't too good. What I can recommend to many of you is SoftMaker Office. It's an alternative to Microsoft Office. They are a big alternative to the Microsoft Office products, and they are also working really good with the Microsoft formats. So if you know about LibreOffice, which is the Office software I am using all the day, it's a free Office software suite. It's completely open source and free, but it doesn't really support the Microsoft Word documents. For simple text, this is also okay for Microsoft Word documents, but if you are doing a little bit more, then the layout is messed up and so on. So only use LibreOffice if you're creating new documents, or if you already used something like OpenOffice or LibreOffice, then this is the best software I would recommend you. But if you have to stick on Microsoft Word formats, then have a look to SoftMaker Office, for example, but also WPS Office is an alternative, and I would say even Google Docs if you want to use it. So this is to Office software. This isn't really a big thing anymore in Linux. And also if you are using, for example, Outlook, an email client, then we have a very powerful tool which is called Thunderbird, which got a revamp in the last year. This is now a great software tool, very easy to use, but very powerful, and I really recommend you this to have a look to it. If you didn't already, it's also available for Windows, of course. So just have a look to this. And if you don't want miss Outlook, then there's also an Outlook online version. This is okay, what I heard about this. But also many other software apps are officially supported for Linux. This is, for example, the VLC player, Firefox, Chrome, the Edge browser, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Netflix, Zoom, Teams, Skype, Discord, Dropbox, TeamViewer, Steam, Blender, Audacity, but also some development tools like Visual Studio Code, JetBrains, Eclipse, Android Studio, and so on and so on. Even Unity or Unreal Engine are now supported on Linux. So yeah, this is a big variety, and you get almost all software running on Linux nowadays, which from the big software companies. But if you have some very special software which only runs Windows and you have to use it, there is no alternative about this. Just have a look to the VirtualBox crash course, for example, because with this you can set up a virtual computer on your computer with Windows, and many users and customers which I'm supporting are using this method. I guess I will do also a video about this in the next time. So if you haven't already, just consider subscribing to Linuxort. Every week we are releasing new videos about Linux and open source software, which is a very important part of our digital world nowadays, and more important than never before, I would say. Also, if you have some Windows application which isn't too much in the 3D graphics, then this VirtualBox method, for example, works great, and you can run every software with this on your virtual computer because, yeah, it's a virtual computer with a official Windows inside. So you can use the benefits of Linux, but you don't have to make a trade-off in terms of software compatibility at this point. If we have a look to our myth back again, and don't even get me started on games. What is about this? I would say Linux and games is the best situation we ever had in the Linux world, because almost all games are now supported on Linux. There's one restriction: if your software is using anti-cheat software, so you can't cheat, or they are observing if you are maybe cheating. This doesn't work at some games. So even if the software is not officially supported for Linux, many Windows games are working at a glance, and I also made a video about this. I put you the link into the video description, of course. Here we have it, Gaming on Linux. Just have a look to it. That's also not a thing anymore. Only if you are really a hardcore gamer and you have to play, for example, Fortnite, because yeah, this doesn't run on Linux. But no worries. Also here on Linux, you can dump thousands of hours into your games. So everything's fine at this point. Not with every game, but with almost every game. Last but not least, all well and good, but until my Linux is up and running and I can handle it, it's not worth the time. Is this time invest worth it, switching to Linux? And at a first point, I have to say, yes, it could take some more time until you get your Linux up and running, until you got some different software, until you are familiar with the new Linux software, because many small software applications, for example, a video downloader, are not working with Linux, but here we also have great video downloaders and many other tools, so don't get afraid of this. This is no problem. But yeah, at the first time when you are switching to Linux, you have to invest some time in it. This is depending on how you were using your computer until now, which software you were using, but it's completely irrelevant in which position you are. I would say the time you are investing now switching to Linux will pay off later in the long run, because if you're switching to Linux, you have to learn something new about your computer, maybe what's the BIOS, how does an operating system boot, how do I install another operating system, how do I install software under Linux, how is Linux working at a kind, and also you have the full control over your privacy and your data on Linux. This is also very important. And you are learning solving problems on your own. And what really pays off on Linux, there are many software alternatives which are completely free and open source. So you stay more independent with great functionality, and which we learned already in the video. Good software doesn't have to cost something. For some points, this is also true for Linux. For example, the master PDF editor, it's the PDF tool which some guys are using very heavily. But also next to this master PDF editor, we have other PDF tools like Sonal++ or PDF Arranger, which are really good and also still open source. So in conclusion, the time you invest now in Linux, you may invest, for example, under Windows later because of some Windows errors, update fails, or some freemium software which wants you to upgrade to the premium. In the long run, you become more digital sovereign, you have more money and many more skills which are helping you a lot in the future. That's it, because if Linux is running at the point of time, then it's running like a Swiss watch, for example. It's very stable, and yeah, it just works for years and years. So yeah, this was it to the 5 most known Linux myths. I hope I could bring more light into these topics. And if you wanna try Linux, just have a look to the end card or into the video description. I am putting you the Linux Mint crash course, or for example also the Ubuntu crash course if you wanna use this. There I show you how to switch step by step very easily from Windows to Linux. And if you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Then we are seeing us in the next video in about a week. So have a great day. Bye.